and welcome to this webinar that I've really been excited about for a long time. I'm going to be experimenting with some brand new material, some of which I've been working on as recent as last week. And I really just want to invite each of us to be as present as possible as we begin to get in touch with our authentic self. And so one of the things I'd like to do is start with a guided meditation. And there's a couple of times in the webinar, if you want to take notes, please do. But for the most part, I'm just going to ask you to be and to be present. We're going to, after we do the contemplation and reflection, I'm going to connect awakening to our conscious leadership model. Then I've got some questions for you, some questions for your consideration as it relates to your own personal awakening. We'll look at this concept of creating space for grace, and then we're going to spend some time with some sample practices that I've learned recently from Craig Hamilton, which will allow us to deepen our practice of connecting to our true self. We'll end with a couple of quotes. I actually get a chance to quote my favorite author, my son, later in the program, something I'm pretty excited about. And then we'll end with a reading from the Book of Awakening. So I'd like to invite everybody to relax. And let's, if only briefly, connect with our true, authentic selves. Forget about who you think you should be and what you should be doing. Let go of any social mirror expectations and tap into your true self. Believe that Source's light will illuminate your true self for all to see. These innate powers arise naturally and spontaneously when our conscious mind is freed from contractions and unconscious habits. So let's just take a moment to get present and to be with who we are at our root. As we explore during this time together, this concept of awakening, awakening is one of the three essential parts of our new conscious leadership model, which you're seeing on the screen right now. And you'll see that the intersection of awakening, resiliency, and compassion result in sustainable performance, whether that's sustainable performance for us as individuals, whether that's sustainable performance for our teams, whether that's sustainable performance for our organizations. When we awaken, we become conscious and more fully aware of our authentic selves. Resiliency is our ability to bounce back from the challenges and disappointments that we experience in the physical world. One of the things that we do in resiliency is we look at bounce back rate. And when we are able to come back to our true authentic self quicker, our bounce back rate is faster. or more resilient. And then lastly, in our conscious leadership model, and this is actually a course that we will be rolling out in April, compassion is the willingness, and this first part is really key, the willingness to be kinder to ourselves and others as we transcend any limits to our potential by helping ourselves and each other work through our collective challenges. I mean, when I think about compassion from a leadership perspective, leaders, and all of us on this call are leaders. Leaders should be making the lift easier for all those that are in our stead. We should be removing barriers that prevent people from working and contributing at their full potential. So our dive today, in whether we'll spend an entire hour or not, I don't know, because I haven't timed it yet, will be focused primarily on this idea of awakening and tapping into our true self. So here's I'm going to go to a next section, and I do want to spend about I want to have you spend about 7 to 10 minutes on this section. I have some questions, and I would like you to not necessarily write out the questions, but that you can certainly do, but to really reflect deeply on your responses to the questions. And these are questions that will frame the rest of our journey this afternoon around awakening. And I may add one. So here's questions for consideration. We're going to spend a total of 7 to 10 minutes reflecting on each of these questions and actually journaling. So if you have a journal, write your responses in the journal, or if you just need a piece of paper. So the first of 4 questions, and I may add a fifth. How genuinely are you showing up for the moments that matter most? So that's question 1. Let's spend a couple of minutes kind of reflecting. How genuinely are you showing up for the moments that matter most? Actually, I'll go through the 4 questions and I'll add one so that you can actually work on these questions uninterrupted and at a deep, deep level. As you reflect on your life and your leadership, what authentic part of you is not showing up? Here's an added question. What are your unique and natural gifts? You can probably see the connection to the previous question. Next question. How is your mindful presence fostering collaboration, compassion, and results? Where in life might you be sleepwalking or unconscious? And then I'm going to ask you to add one more question. What brings you joy right now in this moment? So those are 6 questions. 4 are on the PowerPoint slide that's displayed in front of you on this webinar. The 2 that I added, what are your unique and natural gifts? And what brings you joy right now in this moment? And so I'd ask you to spend 7 to 10 minutes with those questions. Maybe you won't cover all of the questions. One of the things that I have learned in Deep Awakening, in fact, a course that I'm currently taking is the practice of deeper awakening, is to just start writing, continuous writing. Don't overthink it, because as soon as we start to overthink, our responses to these questions, we are operating from the egoic self, not the true self, not the higher self, not the self with a capital S. So I'm going to put us on the timer. I'm going to put 7 minutes. You can cherry pick the questions, but allow the answers to any or all of the questions to flow from your true, authentic self as a beginning of the process of awakening. I'm going to put myself on mute, and I'll be back in 7 minutes. Okay. So hopefully that, created a bit of an opportunity for you to reflect on who you really are. I was reminded of a book that I read back in 2003, and it was part of my coaching certification through IPEC. And the book's title was Remember You're Already Perfect. And so oftentimes we lose touch because we are moving at such warp speed with who we truly are, our unique gifts, our unique talents. And some of you may have taken an opportunity to see me when I did my TED Talk, TEDx Utica in September. And if there was a time that I was in flow, and I actually presented the slide that's up in front of you right now. It was actually a phrase that I think I need to attribute it to my business partner, Cindy Massengale, where we look at this idea of creating a space for grace. One of the things that we don't do often enough is create that space for us to really tap into our authentic self, the person that was sent here into this physical world to share his or her own gifts with other people. For those of you that didn't see the TEDx talk, the space for grace is where our full attention intersects with the present moment. In sports, sometimes we call it flow. We're in the moment. We're not needing to think about it, but we're significantly challenged that we are tapping in to our higher self. And in this space for grace, this place where our full attention intersects with the present moment, we are able to tap into source energy, the universal energy, where anything and everything is possible. In this space, we tap into intuition, inspiration, and intention. If you think about intuition, those gentle nudges that we each get from the universe that tell us what to do and what not to do, our gut feel. Really, we're more in tune, we're more attuned to our authentic self. Inspiration, those sources of purpose and meaning that surround each and every one of us. And lastly, intention. You were intentional today. 20 of you were intentional today to take the time out to be deliberate creators by tapping in to the law of intention. The law of intention says, what we hold in mind tends to manifest. Imagine if more of us, more of the time, were having the intention to have our genuine, authentic self show up. To show up in an awakened fashion, to show up in a resilient, in a compassionate way. I'm convinced that the real role of leadership is to make the way easier for those that follow. The true, authentic role for leaders, and we're all leaders, everybody on this call, is to make it easier for those who follow. And so as we think about true awakening, it requires on a regular basis to create the space for grace. And we're going to practice that, and I'm going to ask you to be experimenters today as we embark upon awakening together. It's more of a process of discovery than creation. we're tapping into more of who we truly are, not who we think we are. In fact, Buddha means awakening. And so one of the things I would like to do is I want to introduce you to, but not just introduce you to, I want to take you through some sample practices for awakening. And we're going to do a series of 3 different practices. And we're going to do them in very short increments. And so I'm going to set them up, and then we're going to perform on it. We're going to perform each of the 3 first for 15 seconds, and then we'll take a short pause, and then we'll do it for 30 seconds. And this will begin to start and perhaps deepen the practice of what Craig Hamilton would refer to as direct awakening. And so get comfortable and just listen. No need to write anything down. If anybody would like the notes, you can go back. You can certainly listen to the recording, but I'm more than happy to send the notes that would follow. But the first practice that we're going to do, first of 3, we're going to break it up into 2 segments, a 15-second segment and then a 30-second segment. So the first one is learning to be natural. Learning to be natural. So what I want you to do, and I'll let you know when, and then I'll let you know when to stop. For the next 15 seconds after I say when, just let everything be. And that's all the direction I'm going to give. So for the next 15 seconds, just let everything be. Begin. And stop. So that was the first of 6 mini practices of awakening. So now we're going to double the time. We're still focused on learning to be natural. The more we learn to be natural, the more we tap into that natural, authentic part of us. So now we're going to let everything be for twice as long, for 30 seconds, on my command. Ready? Go. And stop. You might notice if there was any difference. Was it easier to do for the shorter time? I think one of the things I'm realizing that I can do almost anything for 15 seconds. But we're practicing. It's called practice for a reason. Not too much thinking, not too much guiding. Too much thinking is really the ego, the mind, little bear, getting in the way of us just being natural. So that was the first practice of awakening. Now we're going to move to the second practice. We're going to use the same time increments. We're going to start with 15, and then I'll pause it, and then we'll move to 30. Now don't think too much about this, but here's what we will be practicing in this next segment. Practicing being utterly innocent. You don't know anything. It's interesting. You're curious. You don't know anything. Don't get involved with your mind. Once we get involved with our mind, we begin to go asleep. So again, we'll go for 15 seconds. Practice being utterly innocent. Don't know anything. Don't get involved with your mind. So we're going to do 15 seconds beginning now. And stop. Just going to take a pause. Same awakening practice. We're now going to double the time to 30 seconds, practicing being utterly innocent. Don't know anything. Don't get involved with your mind. 30 seconds beginning now. And stop. Before we move to the next one, we're getting ready for our second retreat for Lead Forward, which is our year-long transformational leadership process. And as part of getting prepared, I reread two of the books that support this first overnight retreat, and one of them is Search Inside Yourself, which for those of you that don't know was written by the Google engineer, and it's the backdrop of their emotional intelligence course. And it's emotional self-awareness, or awakening, or returning to your true authentic self, requires some level of sitting quietly without thought, which can be very challenging, but without judging it, without the left brain editor, the egoic mind getting in the way, and just beginning to develop. So today we're just taking in small chunks these beginning practices of awakening, this discovery of our true authentic self, allowing us to shine and illuminate others in a very natural and effortless way. So we're going to move to the third practice, which I think it gets progressively harder. At least that's my experience with it. So again, we're going to do 15 seconds. I'll stop you. We'll reset, and we'll do it for 30 seconds. And for the next 15 seconds, my request is for you to do nothing, or don't do anything, whichever you prefer. So for the next 15 seconds, do nothing. Begin. And stop. Take a breath. I might speculate that most, or at least some of us, were able to do nothing for 15 seconds. Now let's double the increment. Again, we're awakening to our true self. So let's do 30 seconds of doing nothing, or don't do anything. Ready? Begin. And stop. You know, you may want to make a note or two if your journal is handy. If it was easier or harder, easier to do it for shorter time, harder, you know, what was your experience with it? But remember, if we go back to the beginning contemplation and reflection, let's, if only briefly, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, to connect with our true authentic selves. Being natural, being utterly innocent, not knowing anything, doing nothing. Forget about who you think you should be in what you should be doing. Don't get involved with the mind at that level. Let go of any social mirror expectations and tap in to your true self, your unique and natural gifts. Believe that Source's light will illuminate your true self for all to see. These innate powers arise naturally and spontaneously when our conscious mind is freed from contractions in unconscious habits. So 3 short practices that begin to facilitate the awakening process, connecting us more closely, more solidly, more firmly with our true, authentic selves. So what I'd like to do is extend this practice 5 minutes, where we will pick up on the last one, where you do nothing or don't do anything for 5 minutes. Now, the only guidance I'll give is if you find yourself doing something, just notice it and gently release it and come back to practicing being utterly innocent. So again, we're not just talking about what awakening is. We are directly practicing how to get there. And it's actually nowhere to go because you're already there. So let's take 5 minutes of doing nothing. And then we'll move on to the next piece of the agenda, where we'll start to really look at, you know, this discovering your true self in your inner pilot light. So I'm going to reset. 5 minutes, slightly longer practice of direct awakening. Begin. and then stop. So again, a slightly longer practice of a direct awakening. As we begin to spend more time creating the space for grace, engaged in these practices of awakening, we begin to discover our true identity. And identity means the part of us that is absolutely rock bottom. Our identity is the fingerprint of our soul, the part of us that is unchanging. This was my Valentine's gift to my daughter last night, her and her boyfriend, and they both actually liked it. I shared this writing with them. But if we think of our affiliations as who we are, we will be missing the much more fundamental truths about our own uniqueness, our authenticity. Remember that your identity is not formed by your experiences. It may be that through your experiences, you can and will discover your true identity. What are your experiences helping you discover about your true nature? And I'll repeat that question and take a few minutes to reflect on that. What are your experiences helping you discover about your true nature? Just take a minute to be with that question. I had put this slide in. I was really pleased with my timing until this one. I should have had this slide up a little earlier. Your inner pilot light. This idea, which is really discovering your true identity. As we're winding down, and I want to share something with you that's really was very moving for me, and some of you that have been, who I know, and I don't know everybody on the call, will be familiar that one of people that really has been very helpful for me and very inspirational, helpful for me to tap into my true authentic self is my son Rennie, who I miss dearly, who's now in his freshman year at Georgetown. And I do, as I was preparing for this session, there was a quote. It's actually a couple lines from an essay he wrote that he shared with me. One of the things that Rennie and I have in common is we both love the writings of Thoreau and Emerson. And so early January, he shared this essay that he submitted to a Thoreau contest, and it was in response to a prompt. So you had to write a 750-word essay, and the prompt was, pursue some path, however narrow and crooked, in which you can walk with love and reverence. And that was from Thoreau's journal, October 18th, 1855. And Rennie went on to write a very beautiful essay. But these two lines really resonated with me as it relates to awakening. And I want to share them with you. The horizon of desire calls us relentlessly out of comfort and toward the most terrifying of lives, our own. To ignore the call would be to ignore an essential part of our being, however foreign and hostile it may seem. And I thought that those two lines kind of were a call to me to awaken and to express my true self, my unique gifts, the reason that I was sent here. And so I'll repeat those two lines as you think about discovering your true identity in awakening to your higher self. The horizon of desire calls us relentlessly out of comfort and toward the most terrifying of lives, our own. To ignore the call would be to ignore an essential part of our being, however foreign and hostile it may seem. So the process of awakening requires us to spend some contemplative and reflective time. It requires us to consider those questions about unique gifts. When are you most in flow, inspired, in tune with the intuitive nudges from source energy, being on purpose, being who you were sent to be, not suppressing your gifts, your authenticity, but awakening to the real you. So I'm going to end today, and we may end a few minutes early, and I will scan to see if there are any hands. But I'm going to end with actually a longer passage, which comes from the Book of Awakening, because I think it pulls all of this conversation we've had on this webinar around awakening together. And it was the reading from yesterday, Valentine's Day. Love at first sight. We're too deliberate, the love is slight. Whoever loved, not having loved at first sight. The true power of love at first sight is often missed because we insist on limiting its meaning to the sweep of falling into another person upon first meeting. To appreciate the deeper sense of this, we must uncover and reclaim the importance of first sight itself, which has more to do with seeing things essentially rather than physically for the first time. An awakening is a process of seeing things essentially rather than physically. We all walk around within the numbness of our habits and routines so often that we take the marvels of ordinary life for granted. It is first sight that opens the freshness of each moment, unencumbered by any of our habits and routines. First sight is the moment of God's sight, heart sight, soul sight. It is the essence of awakening. It is the seeing of revelation, the feeling of oneness that briefly overcomes us when nothing, including the illusions of who we think we are, remain in the way. First seeing in this regard is an ever-present threshold to the majesty of what is. And one of the things that I hope that I at least triggered with each of you is perhaps through this time of awakening, reignited your inner pilot light of who you truly are and why you're here. So I appreciate you investing the time. I did not see any questions on the dashboard. One of the things that I want to call your attention to is some other opportunities for continued development with the Emergent team. We've got a free webinar coming up March 15th, Happy Team Conflict. And let me just parenthetically say, I am convinced that there are no high-performing teams anywhere. We have at best groups of people that get along reasonably well and accomplish reasonable goals. And one of the reasons is because we can't have good conflict. And part of the reason we can't have good conflict is because we are not authentically showing up through the process of awakening. Second one is a free webinar on how to have the conversations you're avoiding. So I think you can begin to see a thread here. That's on June 14th. We also are welcoming and encouraging strategy calls with any one of our 4 certified emergent coaches to discuss any of your organization's development needs. The more awakened we are, the more resilient we are, and the more compassionate we are, our ability to sustain high levels of performance will be far greater than we ever imagined. Thank you for investing the time. Hopefully you got one thing out of it that puts you more in touch with your true self. Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.